My boyfriend cheated on me the day after I told him I'm pregnant with our second child. I scheduled an abortion, but I love my baby. The day after I told my boyfriend I was pregnant with our second child, he cheated on me. And now I don't know what to do. I'm supposed to be happy, but instead, I've scheduled an abortion. I love this baby, but I don't know if I can do this anymore. We've been together for 3 years, and until a few days ago, I thought we were happy. We already have a 1-year-old daughter who is the light of my life, and we'd even been talking about marriage. Nick, my boyfriend, had always said he wanted more kids, but ideally, we'd wait until after we were married. But then, we got a surprise. I was pregnant again, and when I told him, he seemed so excited. For a moment, I thought everything was going to be okay. But then, not even 24 hours after I shared the news, everything fell apart. I found out he had been texting someone else, again. It wasn't just anyone either. It was the same woman I caught him talking to a year ago. At the time, he swore up and down that it was innocent, just texting, no real cheating. He promised me that nothing would come of it and that he was committed to our family. I believed him. I was pregnant with our first child, and the last thing I wanted was to think that he would hurt me like that. But now, I'm staring at those same text messages, realizing that I've been played for a fool. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said he wasn't happy with me and that he had reached out to her because I wasn't doing enough. Doing enough? I take care of our daughter, I cook for him, I keep up with the house. How much more can I do? He said it was my fault that he cheated, as if I had pushed him to it. The worst part? He said it wasn't even real cheating because they hadn't slept together. It was just texting, he said, as if that made it okay. But I knew better. I knew that texting wasn't just texting. The woman he was talking to? He had slept with her before. He knew what he was doing, and yet he still blamed me. For context, I've been through hell these past few months. I was recently diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I've been struggling with a mixed manic episode that left me exhausted, mentally and physically. Some weeks I barely slept. But even in the middle of all that, I took care of our 1-year-old daughter practically on my own. Nick worked long hours, and when he came home, he expected me to do everything: cooking, cleaning, taking care of our daughter, and getting his clothes ready for work. I did my best, but I was drowning in exhaustion, barely holding it together. And now, he's telling me that my best wasn't good enough. The betrayal was too much to handle. I couldn't process the fact that the man I loved, the father of my children, had done this to me right after I shared the news of our second baby. I had been so happy. I thought we were going to start planning our future, but instead, I was staring at the possibility of raising 2 children on my own. That's when I made the decision. I scheduled an abortion. It wasn't out of spite or to punish him, it was out of pure fear. I can barely manage raising 1 child by myself, let alone 2. I don't have a support system. I don't have family to lean on, no friends, no career to fall back on. I have nothing except for Nick, and now he's betrayed me in the worst way possible. How could I bring another child into this mess? How could I raise 2 kids in a broken family surrounded by anger, betrayal, and distrust? But here's the thing. I love the baby inside me. I don't want to give up on this pregnancy. I don't want to be forced into a decision I might regret for the rest of my life. When I look at my daughter, I know that giving her life was the best thing I've ever done. She's my pride and joy, my one true success in this world. And now I'm faced with the impossible choice of whether or not to bring another life into this world. Nick doesn't seem to understand what he's done. He says he loves me, that he wants to stay together. But how can I trust him? He cheated on me, blamed me for it, and now he's acting like we can just move on as if nothing happened. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the depth of the pain he's caused or the weight of the decision I'm about to make. I'm lost. 2 days ago, I was so happy, excited about our future, about building a family. Now, I don't know if I can go on. How can I raise 2 kids on my own when I can barely keep myself together? After scheduling the abortion, I felt a wave of relief. But it didn't last. The next morning, I woke up and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. My eyes were hollow, my face pale, and my heart felt heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about the life growing inside of me, and the guilt was overwhelming. I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing, that I wasn't in a position to be a mother to 2 children. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew that wasn't entirely true. It wasn't just about the logistics of raising 2 kids, it was about Nick, and the betrayal, and the shattered trust. How could I bring another child into a life where the person I was supposed to trust the most had already broken me? That day, Nick came home from work early. He said he wanted to talk, but I wasn't in the mood to hear more excuses or listen to him twist everything around to make me the villain. Still, I sat down, bracing myself for what he had to say. "I know I messed up," he began, looking more serious than I'd seen him in a long time. "And I know I hurt you. But I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to lose our family." I scoffed. "You should have thought about that before you started texting her again." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he didn't know how to handle something. "I'm not trying to make excuses," he said. "But I need you to understand where I'm coming from. I felt like we were growing apart. You've been so distant these past few months, and I didn't know how to deal with it." "Distant?" I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "Do you have any idea what I've been dealing with? I'm trying to keep it together for our daughter, for you, for this family, while I'm drowning in my own mental health issues. And you're telling me I've been distant?" "I didn't know it was that bad," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "You never really told me." "Because you never asked," I shouted, the frustration pouring out of me. "You come home from work and all you do is complain about how tired you are, how you just want to relax. Meanwhile, I'm barely sleeping, barely holding it together, and you don't even notice. And then you cheat on me and blame me for it?" Nick ran his hands through his hair, his frustration evident. "I'm not blaming you," he said, though it sounded like he was still trying to convince himself. I didn't know how to handle everything." "Well, you handled it by texting the woman you used to sleep with," I shot back. "Real classy." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us. I could see the guilt on Nick's face, but I didn't know if it was enough. Could guilt really undo the damage that had been done? "I love you," he said after a long pause. "I know I don't show it the way I should, but I do. And I don't want to lose you." His words felt hollow. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could work through this, that things could go back to the way they were. But how could they? He had betrayed me, and now I was carrying his child, unsure if I could even go through with the pregnancy. "I don't know if I can trust you," I said softly, my voice trembling. "You broke something, Nick, and I don't know if it can be fixed." He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "I know," he said quietly, "but I want to try." I stared at him, trying to decide if he was worth trying for. He said all the right things, but the hurt in my chest was too raw, the wound too fresh. I couldn't make a decision right then, but one thing was clear: I wasn't ready to forgive him. Later that night, I lay in bed, my hand resting on my stomach. I had an appointment scheduled, but I wasn't sure if I could go through with it. I loved this baby, and the thought of not having them in my life broke my heart. But the idea of raising 2 children, especially with someone I couldn't trust, terrified me. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with thoughts of the future. What would my life look like if I went through with the abortion? What would it look like if I kept the baby? Neither option felt right, but neither option felt wrong either. I was trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty, and I didn't know how to get out. The next morning, I called my best friend, Lauren. I hadn't told her what was going on yet. I wasn't even sure how to begin. But I needed to talk to someone, and Lauren had always been my rock. She picked up on the first ring, her voice cheerful as always. "Hey girl, what's up?" I hesitated for a moment, then spilled everything. I told her about the pregnancy, about Nick cheating, about the abortion I had scheduled, and how I felt like I was drowning. By the time I finished, there were tears streaming down my face. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I feel so lost." Lauren was silent for a moment, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and understanding. "First of all, I'm so sorry you're going through this. You don't deserve any of it. And whatever you decide, I'm here for you, okay? You're not alone." Her words were comforting, but they didn't take away the weight of the decision I had to make. Lauren's words gave me a sense of relief, even if just for a moment. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one carrying the burden of this decision. But after I hung up the phone, the reality of my situation hit me again like a tidal wave. I still had to figure out what to do, and no one could make that decision for me. The next few days were a blur. I kept going through the motions, taking care of my daughter, trying to stay afloat, but my mind was constantly elsewhere. The abortion appointment was fast approaching, and I felt like I was running out of time. Every time I thought I had made up my mind, I'd second-guess myself. I'd feel my hand resting on my stomach, the smallest bump just beginning to show, and I'd start to wonder if I could really go through with it. Could I live with that decision? Could I live with the regret? Then there was Nick. He had been trying, in his own way, to make things better. He stopped talking to the woman he had cheated with, at least that's what he told me, and he was being more attentive at home. But the damage was done. His attempts at being present and helpful felt more like a Band-Aid on a broken bone. I appreciated the effort, but it didn't erase the betrayal. One night, after putting our daughter to bed, Nick sat down next to me on the couch. He seemed nervous, like he was working up the courage to say something important. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "About us, about the baby, about where we go from here." I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. "I know I messed up," he continued, his eyes fixed on his hands. "I can't take back what I did, but I want to make it right. I want to be better, for you, for our daughter, and for this baby." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time since all of this started, he sounded like he genuinely understood the gravity of what he had done. But I still couldn't bring myself to trust him. Words were easy. Actions? Not so much. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can go through with the pregnancy, or if I can stay with you." Nick's face fell, and I could see the pain in his eyes. But I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was just being honest. I didn't know if I had the strength to raise 2 children with someone who had already shattered my trust. "I understand," he said quietly after a long pause. "But I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you want to keep the baby, I'll be there. If you don't, I'll still be here." His words were kind, but they didn't make the decision any easier. In fact, they made it harder. How could I decide whether to keep this baby when I didn't even know if I could keep my relationship? That night, after Nick went to bed, I stayed up, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, playing out every possible scenario. What would my life look like if I went through with the abortion? Would I regret it for the rest of my life? Would I ever be able to forgive myself? And if I kept the baby, would I be strong enough to raise 2 children on my own if things didn't work out with Nick? The uncertainty was crushing. Every choice felt like the wrong one. The day of the abortion appointment came, and I still didn't have an answer. I sat in the waiting room, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to run out of there, to leave and never look back. But I stayed. I had convinced myself that this was the right thing to do, that it was the only choice I had. But then, as they called my name and I stood up to go into the procedure room, something inside me shifted. It wasn't panic or fear. It was something deeper, something that told me I couldn't go through with it. I sat back down. The nurse looked at me confused. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I couldn't speak. I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. All I knew was that I couldn't end this pregnancy. No matter how scared I was, no matter how uncertain my future seemed, I couldn't do it. "I can't," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I'm sorry, I can't." The nurse smiled softly, understanding. That's okay. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I grabbed my things and left the clinic, my mind still swirling with emotions. Relief, fear, guilt. It was all mixed together in a confusing, overwhelming mess. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't give up on this baby. When I got home, Nick was sitting on the couch waiting for me. His eyes searched my face for an answer. And when I didn't say anything, he stood up, crossing the room to stand in front of me. "I didn't do it," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "I couldn't." Nick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Okay." We stood there in silence for a few moments, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. Our relationship was still broken, and I wasn't sure if we'd ever be able to repair it. But for now, I had made my decision. The decision to keep the baby brought a mixture of relief and terror. I felt like I had crossed a bridge that couldn't be uncrossed, but I was still standing at the edge, wondering what lay ahead. Nick and I didn't talk much that night. He seemed relieved, but there was still so much left unsaid. The silence between us wasn't comforting. It was heavy, full of unresolved pain. Over the next few weeks, I tried to focus on my daughter and the new life growing inside me. I knew the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. I was already struggling as a mother to one child, and the thought of raising two, especially with Nick's betrayal hanging over me, felt daunting. But there was no turning back now. Nick continued to make an effort, but it always felt like he was walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing. I could see him trying, but part of me couldn't shake the anger and resentment that had built up inside me. Every time I looked at him, I saw the man who had cheated on me, the man who had blamed me for his own mistakes. I didn't know how to move forward, and I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Nick finally broke the silence. "We need to talk about everything," he said, his voice hesitant but determined. "I know things aren't okay between us. I've been trying to give you space, but I don't want to keep pretending like we're fine when we're not." I looked at him, feeling a lump form in my throat. He was right. We couldn't keep living like this, with all the hurt and betrayal festering beneath the surface. But the idea of opening up that wound again terrified me. "I don't know where to start," I admitted, my voice shaky. "Start with how you feel," Nick said, his eyes searching mine. "Whatever it is, I want to hear it." The words poured out of me before I could stop them. I told him how much he had hurt me, how betrayed I felt, how I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. I told him how his actions had made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't worth staying faithful to. I told him how scared I was of raising two kids, of being alone, of not knowing what the future held. Nick listened, really listened, for what felt like the first time in a long time. When I finished, there were tears in both of our eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I messed up and I can't take that back. But I want to be better. I want to be the partner you deserve, the father our kids deserve. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." His words were genuine, but forgiveness didn't come that easily. I knew that rebuilding trust would take time, if it was even possible at all. But for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page, like he really understood the damage he had caused. Over the next few weeks, we started to slowly rebuild. It wasn't perfect, and some days were harder than others. But we were trying. Nick became more involved with our daughter and with the pregnancy. He started asking me how I was feeling, offering to help around the house, and even making an effort to check in on my mental health. It wasn't just about him anymore. He was trying to be there for me in the way I had needed all along. Despite the progress, there were still moments when I doubted everything. I wondered if we were just delaying the inevitable, if we were trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. But I kept reminding myself that I was doing this for me, for my kids. If there was a chance to make this work, I owed it to myself to try. As my pregnancy progressed, I found moments of peace. Feeling the baby kick inside me, seeing my daughter smile, and watching Nick step up as a father gave me hope. Maybe things weren't perfect, but they were better than they had been. Maybe that was enough. One evening, as Nick and I sat together after putting our daughter to bed, he turned to me with a serious look on his face. "I've been thinking a lot," he said quietly. "I know we've been through a lot, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us." I looked at him, unsure of where he was going with this. "I want us to move forward," he continued. "I know I have to earn your trust back, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, and I want to be with you, for the long haul." I stared at him, feeling a mixture of emotions. Love, fear, hope, and doubt all swirled together in my chest. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could move past this, but I still wasn't sure. "Nick, I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you," I admitted. "I'm still hurt." "I know," he said softly, "and I'll wait, however long it takes." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that there was no easy answer. There were no guarantees, no perfect solutions, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Nick was trying, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. As my belly grew and our second child's arrival drew closer, I realized that life didn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It could be messy and complicated, full of heartbreak and healing. And in the midst of all that, there could still be love. I wasn't sure what the future held for Nick and me, but for now we were trying, and that was all I could ask for.